Welcome back to the Punk Rock Theologian. Today's episode, we're going to look at the idea of slaying giants and the importance of finishing the job. From Joshua chapters 14 and 15, which I will freely admit is some of the dry parts of scripture that you probably skim through when you're reading this stuff. Because it's only recently that I noticed the value of a couple stories in here. We're starting with a guy named Caleb, one of the 12 spies Moses originally sent to explore the Promised Land when Israel got there. All the spies saw two things. The land is incredible, but it's full of giants. And 10 of those spies said, we can't possibly win this fight, we should just run away. 2 of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, said, it doesn't matter what's in there, God's giving it to us, let's go. The people listened to the 10 and decided to try to go back to Egypt. God told them, if you're not going to listen to me, you're going to wander around in the wilderness until this whole generation dies out. I'll bring your kids back here to inherit the land. Except for those 2 guys, Joshua and Caleb. By the time they come back, Joshua has taken over after Moses died. He's leading the nation. And Caleb doesn't seem to have like a big title, but he did get a special promise that Moses told him that land that he explored would be his. He would get to inherit that land. It's funny, man. It's like, that land that's full of terrifying giants, you can have it. But Caleb was psyched about it. At the end of Joshua 14, they're dividing the land, and Caleb comes to Joshua and says, don't forget, Moses said I get that piece of land with the giants in it. I'm 85 years old now, but God kept me strong and healthy, and I'm ready to go fight for it. And Joshua says, have at it. We move on, and we see that they're dividing the territory, but then in chapter 15, starting at verse 13, you get the story of Caleb. He pops up again, and it says that he does indeed go into giant territory and drive out the 3 sons of Anak. That's the same people that scared the 10 spies. He walks right into their strongest fortress and cleans house. And what's crazy is it's Caleb. I'm guessing it's Caleb and his family. I don't think it's one 85-year-old dude. But it's not his whole tribe. It's not a massive army. It's a squad. It's Caleb and probably some relatives. And they go in and win this fight. They conquer giants. Awesome. But then the chapter moves on, and you see the whole tribe of Judah that does have an army is trying to take their territory, and there's these people called Jebusites that live there. They're not giants, they're just people. But the very last verse of chapter 15 says that the people of Judah did not drive out the Jebusites from their territory, and they live there among them to this day. That's when Joshua was written. A couple hundred years later, King David conquers the city of Jerusalem, takes it from the Jebusites to make it the capital of Israel. So they're still there then, and he doesn't drive them out either. They just become subjects of the king. They linger and they stay around. What's going on? Like, Caleb and a handful of relatives can conquer giants, but an entire army can't conquer normal people? There's a couple things here. Caleb knew that he could not coexist with giants. He knew that he couldn't stand up against giants. So he's coming purely in the power of God and saying, this has to be settled once and for all. If the giants stick around, they're going to kill me. I've got to get rid of them. And God told me I can do it, so let's go. And that's what makes the difference. That's how he wins that fight. It's the same thing that works in our lives too, by the way. This is why this story matters. We have the big things. We recognize the big things, the drug addiction, the affair, whatever it might be. That big thing that is going to destroy your life, that's actively in the process of destroying your life. And we see that and go, this can't continue. The only way I can move on is if we eradicate this thing. And so we will lean into God's power and we'll fight that fight and nail that thing to the ground, just like Caleb did. And that's awesome. We should celebrate that. And that's a battle that needs to be fought and won. The problem is we have the same fight that Judah did too. The Jebusites, these were some of the people that is what God sent Israel there for in the first place. He said, these are the people that are doing such vile practices. It's polluting the land the way they worship their false gods, and it needs to be stopped. They need to be destroyed and driven out and put an end to this. Instead, Judah comes in, wins a few battles, I guess, make it clear that we're in charge now. That's, I think, is the problem. We think that we can handle this. We think we can manage that little thing. Judah thought they could manage the Jebusites and they didn't need to completely eliminate them. We tend to think that we can manage the little things that it's an old habit, and yeah, I probably shouldn't, but it doesn't happen all the time, and it's just a little bit, and it's not that big a deal. It's not really hurting anybody. And so we let these things go. But the problem is the Jebusites eventually pulled Israel into their pagan practices and corrupted the worship of the true God so much that God was disgusted by Israel and drove them out of the land. Those little sins that we let linger in our lives will do the same thing to us. It's not like any one thing is this massive life-altering deal. Over time, it robs our effectiveness, it corrupts our devotion to Jesus, and it just takes us away from being all that he called us to be. God intended for Israel to have peace and rest in the land. He intends for us to have peace and rest in our lives. That cannot happen when we leave the small enemies around, when we don't finish the job.